Welcome to another episode of Giving the Business. It's Troy Evans coming back at you with another entrepreneur whose story you need to hear. I am in studio with Adrienne Lance Lucas from the land of 1,000 lakes. How are you doing?
10,000
10,000
lakes. That's right.
Okay.
I am great.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. Glad to have you on the show. I brought up Minnesota because there's a lot going on in Minnesota right now, as we know, and we'll get to that towards the end of the show. But wanted to learn a little bit more about what was it like growing up in Minnesota and how did that shape who you are today?
So, a lot of people will say Minnesota is a great place to be from. And I grew up always thinking that. Mm-hmm. So when you think about being in Atlanta now, it was predominantly white. In Minnesota, it's the complete opposite when you think about Atlanta. Mm-hmm. And I am one of 5 children. And we grew up in a town called Wayzata, mm-hmm. which it's a lake community and middle-class family. But there weren't people that looked like us. Mm-hmm. The majority of the folks that attended my high school were either ex-athletes for the Minnesota Vikings, and there was our family and very few others. And so growing up there, the schools were fantastic, and I think I developed a better appreciation for having been from Minnesota the older that I became. But growing up there, it was tough. It was tough, especially for being a Black woman and trying to grow up there. For the boys, it's very different. Minnesota has a very high interracial marriage rate. Mm. All 3 of my brothers are with Caucasian women. Mm. And so for my sister and I, it was extremely difficult because the culture did not receive us in the same way that it did the boys. Mm-hmm. And so, growing up, my parents were always telling us, be better than the rest. Mm-hmm. If you're going to stand out and achieve something. We were fortunate in that my father, although he served in the military, for a while we landed in Minnesota when he got out of the service. And in doing so, he became an entrepreneur. So that was actually our first real introduction up front and close to what that life would actually be like. But I enjoyed the opportunity. But again, I would echo saying it's a great place to be from.
Right, exactly. Especially if you're comparing it to Atlanta, right?
Absolutely.
So you mentioned that your father was an entrepreneur after he got out of the military. And that's a rare thing for young Black children to be able to see up close and personal. A little bit more now than in the past. But what was that like, being able to witness him participate in the entrepreneurial endeavor, and did that influence what you wanted to be?
Absolutely. So seeing my father go through the process definitely impacted us because we had the opportunity to see both sides. So when we lived in Texas, he worked in corporate America and then decided to come to Minnesota. He was hired by a man named Percy Ross. And a lot of people may remember Percy Ross. He was a multimillionaire, but his name was synonymous with philanthropy. And so when I looked at him and him bringing my dad in to run his company, there are a couple of things that really stood out. Number one is that Percy Ross went into business as an entrepreneur because he wanted his legacy to continue for his kids. My father ended up separating from Mr. Ross because he realized quickly that Mr. Ross wanted my dad to use his talents to train his son to take over the spot that he was hired to do. And so once my dad stepped out on his own, it was short-lived. He actually had a stroke when I was in high school. So I was 16. My father had a stroke just when he was starting to launch his business. And so from that standpoint, what I saw was a couple things. One, he literally worked himself to the point of having an unhealthy physical situation. But 2, it also showed his responsibility for other people because he had brought on other people. And 3, it also brought us closer to faith just as a family and wanting to see that happen. And it has strongly impacted me because I get a lot of those same traits from my father in terms of being, some would call it a workaholic. I just say you're super passionate about what you're trying to do and accomplish. but also having a strong faith on what you should be doing in your business and probably what you shouldn't be doing, when to partner and when to separate. And so I'm thankful to having had that example.
Yeah, and one thing entrepreneurship teaches you is that you have to have that passion, because it's going to more than likely be several years before you can afford some of the things that a safe and secure paycheck would provide you.
Absolutely. And I think when you think about it, you know, when you look at the number of hours that you put in, I'd rather work for myself if I'm going to put that much time and energy in and bet on myself than have someone else hold my destiny, right? Because as a woman and as a Black woman, I'm at the intersectionality of both gender and race. And so to go into a corporate environment and have them tell you when you're ready to be promoted, you know, control how much money you're going to make, that just has never been really my personality. And it really does come from what my dad taught us, because it was always about, there are only so many hours in a day. And so if you're going to grind and put it out there, do it for yourself and for your children and the legacy that you want to leave, so that you can be appreciated for your own work and wealth.
You know, along those lines, while entrepreneurship may be daunting, the reason why I believe in it is because while you may have the insecurity of finding where the next dollar is going to come from, in corporate America, you can go from being in favor to out of favor.
That's
just
right.
like that.
That's right.
Just 0 to 60 real quick.
That's right.
And you're not in control of that situation in many instances that I've seen.
Absolutely. And so with, and I point back to my father, you know, he said, if you're going to work in corporate, get what you need to get out of it. So don't go in with blinders, right? Because sometimes I think we're so, especially our parents' generation, they were so excited to have you work for a big name corporation, right? So I worked for General Mills, and it was something that my grandparents could understand. They know Wheaties, they know Cheerios, right? They know Yoplait. Right. And when you're an entrepreneur sometimes and you choose different industries, they're not that common household name. They're not, you know, the service industries where people can really understand. And so our families don't celebrate them in the same way. And so you really have to rely on what you know internally to grinding it out as an entrepreneur, because that's truly the theme.
Yeah, it's often a lonely road to get there.
There's
a lot of support along the way.
It is.
So you were in Minnesota, great place to be from.
Right.
And decided to leave there and go to Spelman?
Yes.
Is that your first venture away from Minnesota?
Well, my father was in the service, so we traveled a lot. But I will say this, I was not really excited to attend Spelman. My mother is from Georgia, and she said if I have daughters, they will go to Spelman. I, like most young people, when it comes to college, you're following your peer group. And a lot of my peer group went to school in the Northeast. And so I always say it is one of the best decisions that my parents made for me, because it was not a decision that I made for myself. They saw the things that I would be able to get from Spelman, being in Atlanta, and especially in the AUC, that I would not have recognized, right, as a young person, because I came to college at 16. And so I'm glad that they had the foresight and forethought to say, regardless of what you're talking about, our money is going to Spelman College. Right. And I wish that more parents did that today, because our HBCUs need that talent. They need that extra nurturing that exists in our communities, because it actually is where I launched my entrepreneurial spirit. So being at Spelman, you know, because my parents were not big proponents of paying me, you know, giving me money to travel to see all the other HBCUs, but I wanted to do that, right? Especially being from Minnesota, I wanted to see what else was out there. So even at Spelman, I was able to set 2 small businesses up while I was there. One was, and I'm dating myself, but videos. I had a black video collection when I was in high school. And so I would rent those out for a couple of dollars, you know, a day for people that wanted to do that. and also just looked at what existed on campus and what didn't. One of the things that didn't exist was dry cleaning service. We did not have a dry cleaning service on campus. So I was able to partner with a local Black-owned cleaners to actually have clothes be done. And the last thing I'd say, Troy, is, because you'll connect with this, I was actually there and started Market Friday, what the students know as Market Friday.
Right.
So when I went to Spelman, I don't know that if I had gone to BU or Tufts, that I would have been as actively involved in student government. So a part of entrepreneurship is also showing your leadership. And one of the things that I was able to see very early on is we didn't have enough services and things for the young women that were on campus. We needed to get our eyebrows done. We needed to get our nails done. And so Market Friday was the way that I was able to introduce that to the community.
You know, I can relate to a lot of what you just said. The first, with the parents really making that decision for you, not in terms of Morehouse, but I was an Inroads intern.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And I remember I was in what was the pre-college component, where you had to spend 2 weeks on a college campus while you were in high school. And I remember thinking, I'm not spending 2 weeks of my summer vacation on a college campus, right? And my mom basically was like, yes, you are. And it was one of the best things that ever happened to me, right? It launched me on a trajectory that I wouldn't have gone otherwise, right? And then when I got to Morehouse, I probably had maybe 4 or 5 different business ventures in the first year. You know, selling Krispy Kreme donuts.
That's right.
Giving people rides to the airport.
Look, if you pledged, you were selling Krispy Kreme donuts, and everybody, that was the old Girl Scout model, right? You were going to sell those donuts and figure it out.
Yeah. So the one thing I love about HBCUs, and in particular the AUC, is that hustle that it teaches you, right? I think, you know, to some degree, many Black people have that anyway, but the AUC is going to make you have to rise to the top.
That's right.
What else did you walk away from the AUC with, and what was that overall experience like for you?
So my overall experience was really, it helped me to come into my own in knowing who I am as a Black woman, because being in Minnesota, I didn't have a lot of those examples. And so for me, I knew that being developed at Spelman, that I could do what guys do. So I mentioned I'm one of 5. I have 3 brothers, and my baby sister, we're 15 years apart. But being at Spelman, I knew that I could do, looking at my Morehouse brothers, we were ultra competitive, right? And so when it came to applying for business school, just hearing and seeing things that other Black folks were doing, it made me know that I really could do it and to strive for something greater, right? So, and I like to tell the story of, like, I went to Harvard Business School, but I didn't have, you know, a 4.0, but I knew I was a great leader. And I could point to those things, and I would not have had those same opportunities had I gone to a predominantly white institution, because Spelman gave me the confidence. You could step out there and be bold, and it also shaped me in my advocacy and activism for people that look like me, brown and Black people and underdogs. Because while I was on campus, you know, we had speakers that look like me, that were talking to me, right? I heard from Nikki Giovanni saying, write your own story by the time you're 21, right? We heard from Susan Taylor at that time talking about the essence of Black womanhood. And we also saw, similar to what students are seeing today, Mandela was incarcerated. I slept at the front gate of Spelman College in a shanty that we made, right? Protesting. We protested to get the Coke machines off of the campus because they were supporting the apartheid effort. So those are things that I don't think I would have experienced in other places, because I would have been that only voice. And I don't think that I had the strength at that time to be the only voice standing up for those issues. So that's really what I got. There's nothing you can tell me that I can't do if I really want to do it. Having gone to school, not just at Spelman, but in the AUC. Right.
I remember when I got there, they were protesting Somalia on the campus. And I remember walking around thinking like I am living in school days right now.
That's right.
Right.
That's
and,
right.
It was a wonderful feeling, and it was one of the best decisions I ever made in my life.
Absolutely. So freshman year when we came in, they had the march on Forsyth County.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember, even though I've traveled a lot because of my father's profession, I was never so frightened than here,
Mm-hmm.
going to Lenox Mall
Mm-hmm.
and having somebody call me a nigger,
Mm-hmm.
right, with a Confederate flag, just walking from the MARTA to Lenox Mall.
Mm-hmm.
But it also gave me the courage to want to go march on Forsyth County,
Mm-hmm.
not knowing really what we were getting into. But those are not experiences that I would have received had I not been at Spelman.
Right. And so you go through this completely unique situation and circumstance, and your college experience, and then you decide to go back to Minnesota.
Yeah,
After going through that.
I did.
What led to that decision?
So I wanted to listen. I wanted to be an investment banker.
Okay.
But because of family circumstances, right? My father had a stroke right when I was in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And so I needed to go back home and spend some time with family.
Mm-hmm.
But in addition to that, I knew that I wanted to attend Harvard Business School.
Mm-hmm.
And my family is not rich. We were middle class. But my father said, we'll pay for your undergraduate, but after that, it's on you. Either you get married or somebody else is going to have to take care of this.
Right.
And so going home to General Mills, they had a finance rotation program.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, it was general management and helping you truly understand if you were running your own business, right, being responsible for a P&L, you were going to each major division to understand how things were done. Mm-hmm. And so being at home, close to family, 2, wanting to save money because I knew I wanted to go to business school, and then 3, getting proper training so that I could eventually go off on my own because I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur,
Mm-hmm.
but I knew I needed additional training.
And so what did you take away from your experience at General Mills that proved valuable later on, but then also kept you on that journey? That also kept you on that journey and didn't keep you or didn't lull you into, I should say, corporate America.
Yeah, I was not lured by that. So again, it's looking at numbers, right? There were not, Mark Belton was the highest ranked African American at that time. Mm-hmm. He was over a particular brand. And, but when you see people, I'm not one that's like, I'm going to be the first, CEO of a Fortune 5. That was not me. Mm-hmm. My thing was, if they're showing you how far you're going to go. Again, I didn't want to be capped by someone telling me I could only go so far. Mm-hmm. So my plan was I was going to go for 3 years because I had done my research. Harvard you needed a minimum of 3 years mm-hmm. before you would apply. And I was going to do the things that was required in order to get to Harvard. And the reason why I chose Harvard is because as a woman, as a Black woman, I didn't want to be questioned about my intelligence mm-hmm. because I knew I wanted to have a family. So if I left to have a baby and I stayed out of the workforce for a certain amount of years, I didn't want people to think, okay, now she can't think, right? Just because of that decision. I knew I wanted to be married. So for me, it was methodical. But the things that General Mills taught me, it was phenomenal training. It really was. But what it taught me was also to be bold about your decisions. Young people, especially if you want to be an entrepreneur, people are going to tell you no all the time, mm-hmm. right? And you can also ask for forgiveness in taking bold steps because you're young. And so some of the things that I did, immediately out of the gate was I asked for a meeting with the vice chairman mm-hmm. just because I wanted to learn. Mm-hmm. How did they get to that spot, right? Mm-hmm. I didn't get overly involved with only mixing and socializing with Black and brown people because I needed to learn what it is other people were doing. We didn't call them sponsors or allies back then, right? But that's what I actually had several of them. Mm-hmm. And I think that it was, the real attraction was I was bold. I was outspoken. Mm-hmm. I did my work. I worked hard. I wasn't afraid of the work. And I just blended in as a normal human being.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't putting myself in a box.
Mm-hmm. I remember I was working at American Express for a brief moment, and I requested a lunch and got a lunch with Ken Chenault.
Yep.
And it was the first year he became CEO. And I remember getting calls from other people like, how did you do that? Right? And I was like, I asked.
Exactly. Exactly.
Right. So again, something that I can relate to there. So you got your plan, do your 3 years of time in corporate America, and then you go off to Harvard.
Mm-hmm. And I got married in between there.
You got married in between while you were at...
I got married a week before I left for business school.
Okay. So tell me about that.
So it was a part of the plan. I'm one of those people that, you have your plan, and most women can probably relate to this, but we grow up thinking by the time I'm 25, I'm going to be married, and then when I'm 30, so I followed all those things. I don't recommend that people do that now. Just let God work it out for you. But yeah, I was married when I went to business school. He stayed in Atlanta. He was actually a police officer.
Mm-hmm.
And I went off to business school, and I would come back every other week, if you can imagine that. Mm-hmm. So if people, the rigor of an HBS education, dealing with the case studies and all that, and needing to work in teams, it was taxing, but it was something that I needed to do because I wanted to be a good wife. I wanted to, learn everything that I needed to do, as well as network with the folks that are there. So it was just a part of the journey.
That sounds daunting. I mean, just not only the academic side of it, which had, it's one of the most prestigious business schools in the country. Then the distance, then the economic side of it. Mm-hmm. I mean, how did you pull it off?
I saved, because when I went to General Mills, I stayed at home with my parents, and I literally saved pretty much everything that I made. I didn't have to pay for meals or anything. I think I bought a car. That was it, right? And it was used, so that wasn't a lot. But the biggest stress was probably trying to manage the relationship, right, with my then husband. Because you are, I have gone into industries that are male dominated, and HBS is a setting where you have to work in teams, and so you call 2 a.m. and you're in a study group, right? And it's all guys and just me. It put stress on the marriage. I will say that.
Yeah, I can imagine. So you complete your getting your MBA at Harvard, and then what?
So after I left HBS, I went into executive management consulting. So again, I have stayed with the theme of being a generalist, making sure that I learn enough about each of the areas, because at HBS, that's what they grow general managers, hoping that you'll become a CEO one day. And so I followed that. I went to work for CSC Index. And at that time, CSC was a process reengineering consultancy. And what they focused on was actually making sure that you can work on process improvement over time. So for any company that you're in, that's what you would focus on. So I was in the oil and gas and finance practices, and also spent a little bit of time on the utilities practice. So during that time, which was early 90s, there was deregulation in the utilities industry. And so I was able to actually launch my career with CSC here, and then go abroad to take some of those same skills, and spent some time in Birmingham, England for a couple years, and then come back to the States before I left.
So anyone who was around during that time knows about the deregulation in the utility business, because you were probably approached to start a network marketing opportunity during that time, which didn't pan out for a lot of people, but definitely a booming industry. And so you spent some time in England overseas. How did that shape your trajectory?
That was an amazing experience, right? Because it actually helped me see the world more broadly. So as an entrepreneur, we're always looking for where does the market truly exist. So it helped me to think about getting off our block and not just doing things that are right here in the US. And so it helped me do two things. One was develop international relationships, and letting me know that the world isn't as big as I think it is. But two, it was that was an industry that was slower moving, I would say, because utility companies weren't rapidly moving. So it helped me to look for other areas that may be, may fit more of that model versus looking at the sleek and more sexy, fast moving things. Because, I was also there at a time when the internet was just starting to take off and things like that. But it helped me to open my eyes a little bit more broadly, and develop some international relationships that helped me test out other businesses that I had in the future.
And in all of these examples that you've given, they are male-dominated industries. And then you're talking about you want to go into entrepreneurship, which is also male-dominated. How are you surviving with you being a female, just as an important part of your identity as being Black?
So for me, it's just always been, because I've had brothers. So although, yes, I am a woman, I've always been around the guys because I've had brothers. But I also, they're funny stories of just working in male-dominated fields. And it started in consulting, because on Fridays when you come back to town or when you're going out, I don't know why the strip club is the number one spot for men to go and interact. It's the golf course. It's the chicken wings. It's the food, really. But, I had to encounter all of those things of, do you go and hang out with them, or do you stand on something else for those principles? And I typically would not choose to do that. I wanted my work to speak for itself. But that has been a common theme. Even very close friends of mine that I'll do business with. I told you about, a story of being here and, they want to go eat at Twin Peaks. That's not my choice of places to go and eat, but I'll go and we'll make jokes, about it. So as a woman, I think that I've always just stood by, the work that I do and what I can bring to the table, and not being extremely offended by the way that men interact, because they're men. We're different. Although I would ask for respect in certain, all situations. So there was never a time where I felt violated by that, right? And I would make some comments back to them about the differences between the genders. And so I think my primary aspect was just focusing on the work.
That's interesting that you say that, because I don't drink. And, oftentimes when you're doing business deals, it's in a social setting where drinking is the norm.
Absolutely.
And I think that's me trying to find creative ways to overcome that obstacle was difficult. And that's kind of optional, not my gender is the obstacle, right? That I'm trying to overcome in terms of being accepted and whatnot. So I have to imagine that that's something that was probably, led you to being very innovative and creative.
Absolutely.
To get around the obstacles that were being presented.
True. And it's also, we talk about superpowers now. Being a woman was my superpower. I was always going to get the attention because I was the only woman in the room, right? So you couldn't ignore the fact that I was there. If I had something intelligent to say, typically that led to other conversations. So I viewed it as an asset versus, how some people may walk in and they're intimidated and they view it as a weakness. I never viewed it as such. Ever.
Okay. And so you're getting this experience in the utility world and what have you. When do you make the leap to entrepreneurship, and how did you know you were ready? and how did you prepare for
Do
that?
you ever know that you're ready?
No,
I don't think we ever know that we're ready. But for me, it was having my son, right? Because I was ready because I wanted more flexibility to be the type of mother that I could for him. And at that time, I was also, we were, within 2 years of having my son, I was getting ready to go through a divorce. And so being an entrepreneur allowed me that flexibility to manage my own time. So for me, it was lifestyle as much as, right, wanting to control my destiny. And you work a lot of hours, and I wanted to work them, when my son was asleep. Right. So that's the path that I actually chose. Being ready, I did the things that I thought I should do. I went to Harvard. I worked in a really competitive program at General Mills. I got very early management experience, but I don't think you're ever ready, because the market will change. You'll think you've lined everything up appropriately. I've done commercial real estate. The market took a dive. There's nothing I could have done to prepare that. But one of the things that, my dad always told me is make sure that you have options, right? So even in working in corporate America, I knew my plan was to leave in 3 years. General Mills did not know. And so, I was up for additional promotions. And so just to be able to walk away from that is something that entrepreneurs do really, really well if you're engrossed in what you're doing. And you have to be able to pivot on a dime if you need to. So for me, it was I ready? No, probably not. I had some successes and failures, but from a lifestyle standpoint and wanting to control my own destiny, it was the perfect time.
So that's interesting that you looked at entrepreneurship as an advantage towards you needed to be in control of your time, with you having a young son and getting ready to go through a divorce and what have you, because it could also be looked at as like the last moment to start a business. For me, for instance, I was on an entrepreneurial journey when my daughter was getting ready to be born, and that's what made me go get a job. Right? But you seem to have made it work for you. And what would have I had to imagine being an immensely emotional time as well, with a newborn and having relationship troubles.
Yeah, it. I'm pretty frugal, so these are other lessons. If you know you want to become an entrepreneur, you need to save your money, because there will be great times and low times, and you have to have enough cash, right, to weather those storms. And so it's just the way that I've always operated, so it probably didn't make that big of a difference. Emotionally, it was an outlet. When you're doing things that you really enjoy, like working on my projects were exciting. It was actually that relief from some of the reality in dealing with, either the relationship or, a child crying or whatever that may be. And I had a lot of help. My parents, my mother came down. I think my son, it was a year before, I had to even consider possibly getting childcare, just because I had a great support system.
That's great. So one of the things I want to draw attention to is many people see the result and they don't see the process, right?
Yes, indeed.
And so you've mentioned a few times now that you saved to put yourself in a position to take advantage and do what you wanted to do, right? But many people don't see that process, nor that sacrifice that led to that end result.
Yeah. Right. So, Troy, it is, and I'll tell you, I had saved probably, so I'm going to tell you two things. Saving means not doing what everyone else is doing, plain and simple. I happen to get along with my family, so we can hang out. There are 5 of us. we're like our own clan, and it's okay. But I wasn't off doing what other people may be doing. I wasn't somebody hanging out at the bar, drinking all the time, overeating, all those things. And so little by little, that money adds up. And I also had really good friends. One of the first companies I started was a company called Home Orbit. And I partnered with a guy who went to Kellogg, and he had worked for Chanel and, but again, was a great saver. And so when we were able to launch the company, we used a lot of our own capital. Mm-hmm. And what that did was it made it easier for others to invest in us because we were coming to the table with something other than just a request.
Right.
And but that process is, as you know, I married a police officer. So we weren't going to, we pretty much lived off of what he was making versus what I was making. Mm-hmm. But again, that allowed me to save a lot more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so you are making the leap into entrepreneurship, and is Home Orbit your first leap?
That was my first leap.
So tell me about that.
So Home Orbit was, we say it was, Facebook before its time.
Okay.
Spelman was our first client.
Okay.
We actually introduced, it was creating an orbit around what you have as a part of your home. Mm-hmm. So it was building the networks that you would have for a physician, this, that, or the other, around your own little home orbit. Mm-hmm. And we raised, that was my first introduction actually to private equity, because we raised capital, and we were able to sell. We didn't lose money, but we didn't become, rich, right, by any means necessary. But it taught me all the steps that I needed to actually take those next steps as an entrepreneur. So I was able to do Home Orbit, and then stayed in finance, became a vice president of a company called Home Bank that was here, and we did home loans. And that was my first introduction in getting into this housing market on the origination side before actually launching and co-founding Inheritance Capital Group, which was at its peak over $200 million in assets under management for commercial real estate.
So you just covered a lot of territory.
Yes, I did.
You just went from you saved up some money to you got $200 million in assets under management.
Yeah.
So first of all, if you had Facebook before Facebook, why didn't you sue Facebook just like everybody else did?
It wasn't exactly like Facebook, right?
Right. So, okay, so you raised, how much money did you raise to launch that?
So we raised $2.5 million for that.
Okay. So that's a big first.
It was big back then.
Gate.
Mm-hmm.
But
remember I talked about friends and family and relationships. So the gentleman that I mentioned now is he is the executive marketing manager for MailChimp. And so Tom had phenomenal relationships. He worked at Chanel. A lot of those relationships came with him. So when it came time to get capital, I didn't have the rich uncle, right? My family was middle class, not wealthy by any means. So our relationships did stretch in order to, create that capital infusion that we needed to launch that particular business.
And it also seems like you saw the benefit of partnering with someone who could maybe bring something to the table.
Absolutely. And actually he found me. We worked together at CSC Index. And when Index actually folded. And so Tom came and said, hey, I'm looking at doing this business. Would you come and partner with me? And I said, of course, let's get it done, because I was always looking for what would be my first venture out of the gate. And so that was a great, solid relationship because he was bringing some of the relationships and expertise where I was bringing some of the sales and process experience that we needed in order to make a good relationship long term. So once we got rid of that, we're still very close friends. And I know that Tom is someone I can always pick up the phone and call on if I needed, additional infusion of capital for something he's interested in.
And so to exit, most entrepreneurs don't have the benefit of having even just an exit out of the first one, even if it was a break-even exit, right? Normally, you take your lumps on that first one or two tries, and you have to regroup before you can go at it a third or fourth time. But you were able to go through the entire process of the cycle from start to finish, and not really have to regroup coming out of that. It sounds like.
Yeah, we were made whole.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that part of that has to deal with who you partner with,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you can easily walk away when
Mm-hmm.
things get tough. But we both knew there are other things that we wanted to do. So you have to rely on you as a person and how you would feel, all those things, because a lot of your first money, especially for your first venture, it is friends and family.
Mm-hmm.
And you do not want to burn your friends and family. And so we were committed to that. We were really, really committed to that. And the luxury of having HBS partnered with Kellogg,
Mm-hmm.
there were people that we could draw upon in those networks
Mm-hmm.
to assist us in navigating. So I don't want to underestimate. It wasn't like we were geniuses or anything like that. We broke even in our disposition,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we made all of our investors whole.
Mm-hmm. The power of the network is real.
Yes,
right?
indeed.
And so, you got a taste of entrepreneurship now. You know you want to stick with it eventually. And so, when do you get back into it, and why did you choose that industry?
So I got back into it after my divorce was final.
Mm-hmm.
So I partnered with a gentleman out of Detroit, and we were just talking about, real estate, commercial real estate, because I was considering going into business with my ex-husband actually.
Ooh.
And building, and developing a small subdivision.
Mm-hmm.
And this opportunity came up to do private equity and working with pension funds to raise our own capital to do something bigger.
Mm-hmm.
So again, not really knowing what we didn't know, but had saved money, was able to invest, and just by the grace of God, literally, I had spent all of my saved money, minus like $10,000, before we finally had our first pension fund sign on. And they signed on for $27 million. I'll never forget that. And it was like I could breathe again.
Right.
But it was literally down to, I was like, I'm going to be broke. I'm not going to have anything. I have my child. What am I going to do? And that one was through prayer, honestly. The partnership was, we did commercial real estate, big boxes, corporate sale leaseback. So again, very steady income to pension funds. And one of our advantages was that a lot of pension fund managers don't look like us, but those making the decisions on those pension funds, they do.
Mm-hmm.
They're general city employees, they're police and firemen.
Right.
And so being able to tell the story of how we don't have those rich uncles either, but would be good stewards of their money, that helped us get through the door in the final hours.
That's amazing, because I could definitely see how, having a rapport kind of right off the bat based on looking like someone that you're, engaged with in business is going to give you an advantage there. But then at the same time, I could see how, you're not asking for a chump change, right? You're asking
Right.
for some serious dollars.
Right.
And one thing I've noticed that I wish more black professionals would do is take the game-winning shot when they have the ball. Meaning, you got hired to take that shot,
Right.
but you need a three, but you're taking layups instead.
Right.
And so they often are not willing to take the risk of betting on a new startup private equity company, because they equate that to some personal consequence for themselves, right? How did you alleviate that?
Yeah, that's a great question, because one of the things we do your research. That's one, right? So there was the reason why we spent so much money, literally, was trying to follow that traditional path where you go to all of the conferences, right? For pension fund, all these different things that you're supposed to do. And again, it came down to relationships. My partner was from Detroit, grew up with most of the people that were in the city, and I brought the pedigree and experience. He brought a lot of the relationships to the table. And so we could easily show in what we were doing in the alternative investment class was mailbox money for them. A lot of other emerging managers were going to the table with very speculative investments, right? We weren't saying we're going to build something new. We were saying we're going to buy an existing asset. It's already income producing. So that's automatically going to be giving you money to your pension fund, which you desperately need to make sure that pension funders, actually receive that income. And so strategically, it made sense. That story made sense. So it was less of a risk for them to take a chance on us than what some other managers may have been bringing them to the table at that time. But it took 18 months. Like I said, it wasn't an overnight, we'll take a chance on you. The other disadvantages that we had, in addition to being black, because just because you're black and other people are black doesn't mean that they're going to trust you, right? But we were also looked younger than we weren't that young, but we looked younger than the 68-year-old white man that's coming in to also do his pitch, right, on in that pension fund meeting. So I think for us, it was staying steady and consistent with all of the networking that has to be done, because pension funds, it is all relationships. Rarely do they just look at the pitch and say, that's the one to go with. So it's nurturing those relationships, and over 18 months, we were able to finally get it done. And 27 million, although it sounds like a lot, that's very small. A lot of other commercial real estate, the big guys are $1 billion plus. We capped out at 220 million, which for us, it was nice, but there's a whole lot more that could have been given.
And did it start to snowball with that first 27 million? Did it start to come easier?
So it did start to come easier, but you also saw our money came primarily from Detroit. And so you saw a shift in the city government. So Kwame Kilpatrick was the mayor during that time. You had a lot of pensions that were under pressure because of corruption scandals, etc., that took place during that time. And so for us, I think all black emerging managers were painted with one big brush that we're going to get rid of the black emerging managers as we go through this, tumultuous time. So that's where we actually ended up. We took a step back. It was difficult to get money from other places after what you saw happen you saw it in New Orleans and you saw it in Detroit.
And so $200 million in assets. How long does that venture last for you, and what is your exit out of that venture?
So our private equity fund was 7 years with 3 one-year options, so a total of 10 years. My partner and I actually dissolved our partnership. He ran into some challenges, and so I ended up getting a new partner to buy out their piece, and then just disposed of those assets last December.
Very nice. And so I know that you've been doing a lot of other ventures, right? While that was going on. So talk to me about what else you're involved in.
Sure. So I mentioned that my entrepreneurship is focused on lifestyle and controlling my own destiny. And so one thing about the private equity world that allowed me to do was look to other passions. And my people are my passion. And so working with historically black colleges and universities was one of the things that I wanted to do. And so I also have a consulting firm, Lance Lucas Associates, and we specialize in implementation partnership with our HBCUs, because one of the things that you will see, anyone that's ever hired a consultant, they leave these great documents, right?
Right.
They tell you all the great things you need to do.
Right.
But the reality is most organizations can't do it. They have limited resources, limited staff, and limited capital to get it done. So we're the firm that actually becomes the extra hands and feet and expertise to implement the visions that some of those institutions have. So I launched Lance Lucas and Associates in 2002 and worked with some of our top tier HBCUs on capital campaigns, helping them with their fundraising development to execute the visions that they have.
And of course, starting in the AUC, right?
That's right.
Okay. Just check.
Spelman and Morehouse were top two.
And now, when you're talking about those consulting leave behinds, did you ever watch the Showtime show with Don Cheadle, House of Lies?
Yes.
Right. That's what it immediately
yes.
went to. But you wasn't in that ilk, right?
No. I'm the good guy.
Right. Good
I'm the good woman.
Right. So, I wanted to circle back though to, I don't want to let escape, from us in this conversation what's going on in the world right now. This unprecedented moment of pandemic, of unemployment, and now of not a new reality, but at least for us in police brutality, but it seems like the rest of the world is finally
now waking up, right?
And it was sparked, I would like to say, the straw that broke the camel's back in Minneapolis with George Floyd's murder. Coming from Minnesota, what are you feeling? And how is this time shaping you as a business person, and where do you think we're going?
So, coming from Minnesota, I was hurt. Really, really hurt, because no one should have to encounter that. So I felt it just like you've heard of other people on TV. My son is 21. I was married to a police officer. I grew up in Minnesota, so all the things that were shown are close to hit close to home. I was actually home during that time visiting my mother, and seeing the city on fire based on that outrage, but also seeing images on the local news. They were not black and brown people that were setting things on fire, right? So I was like most of the world, lots of mixed emotions because of I knew the work that had been done in Minneapolis in that area of town to get a target set up and have green space and all these wonderful things that you see there. So that part of it was hard. As an entrepreneur, I was also, I think back on Rodney King, right, and what happened there. And when you talk to folks in LA, how black business owners were protecting their establishments, and people in the community knew not to burn down that one, if you will, right? And so as an entrepreneur, it makes me think more about the need to amplify the number of black businesses that exist. Because we don't, you'll go to Midtown and you'll see a flag in the window that lets you know that they are either owned by someone in the LGBTQ community or that they welcome them as patrons. There's no African American flag in any window. It's almost like we're being hidden from the businesses that we have and what we've done. And so I'm hopeful that will change. One, you're seeing it in corporations wanting to partner and, stand beside different businesses, but I hope that they take that all the way down to their diversity vendor programs so that it's more equitable. Because if you are serving black and brown people and we're still sticking to these, I don't know where they come up with these percentages from, right? If it's 10% or what have you. That may not make sense based on the demographics that you are marketing to purchase your product. So I'm hopeful that this is the time to have different conversations about wealth in our country and how Black businesses can play a larger role in making that happen.
What would you say to the would-be Black female entrepreneur who's got an idea right now and is listening to your story and getting ready to make their next move?
So I would say for the would-be entrepreneurs, make sure that you are built for this life. Because I think sometimes we glamorize entrepreneurship. It's not glamorous. I've said it multiple times. It is a lifestyle. You are choosing to give up certain things, right? Whether it's delayed gratification, whether it's time with your family, unless you can build in your business to where your children, your spouse can participate. So I would say first, tune into that because it's not built for everybody.
Right.
And the second thing I would say to those entrepreneurs, if you are and you think that you're ready, don't question it too much. Go out there. And if you're younger, you don't know what you're missing. You haven't made a lot of money yet. So go ahead and take the risk.
Right.
Because it is probably the most rewarding thing that you will ever do in your entire life is to be able to be responsible for other people from a payroll standpoint, to provide an example for your legacy, whether it's just your children and your family, and to be that example in the community so that you can, hopefully one day be on Giving the Business with Troy, right? And share your story.
Yeah, I like that. Don't wait. As they say in spades, study long, study wrong. Right?
That's right.
So.
That's right.
Well, Adrienne, it was a pleasure having you on the show.
Likewise.
Make sure you keep us up to date about what's happening in your world.
I will.
And we will go from there.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.